Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I've always preferred the quiet, the kind of silence that fills the air and makes you feel like you're the only one left in the world. That's why I took the job as the night security guard in this office building. Nothing flashy, just routine. A quiet, almost empty place where I could escape the noise of the outside world and simply exist. No one around, no pressure, just the hum of the lights overhead and the faint sound of the wind pressing against the windows. But that night, it was different. It was just past 3 a.m. when I settled into my chair, the glow of the security monitors casting long shadows across the small room. I'd done this 1,000 times. Checked the cameras, made sure everything was locked, and waited for the hours to crawl by. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the weight of the silence, or the way the building seemed to be holding its breath. But I couldn't shake the unease settling in my chest. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 3:12 a.m. Everything was still. Outside, the world was blanketed in darkness. The only sounds that reached me were distant cars rolling by, the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Inside the building, though, it was like time had frozen. The long hallways, the dark offices, all empty. It felt like I was the only one left in this place, the only one awake. I clicked through the CCTV feeds, watching the various cameras. The main lobby, empty, the stairwell, empty, the elevator bank, empty. It was always like this, nothing out of the ordinary. But then something caught my eye, a flicker, just a brief moment, on the lobby camera. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, a trick of the light. But no, it wasn't that. I squinted at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. There was a man standing there. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The man wasn't moving. He just stood there in front of the camera, staring directly into the lens. His face, it was wrong. His grin was too wide, far too wide to belong to any normal person. His eyes, they were black. Hollow. His smile stretched unnaturally, curving at the corners of his mouth in a way that made my stomach churn. It was as though his smile was frozen in time, like a mask that couldn't be removed. I clicked over to the other camera feeds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The hallway, the stairwell, the elevator, nothing. No sign of anyone. The man, though, he remained in the lobby, staring. Watching. His face was so wrong that I felt like my skin was crawling. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. It's just a trick of the lights, I thought. I'm just tired. Maybe I'm seeing things. But when I switched back to the lobby camera, he was still there. His eyes locked on me through the screen, that grin never fading. The seconds dragged by, slow and suffocating, until the image on the screen flickered. For a brief moment, the feed broke up into static, the picture warping into a blur of colors. I blinked, my heart pounding, but when the image snapped back into focus, he was closer, much closer. I jerked back in my chair. The man, the smiling man, had moved. But how? The cameras hadn't picked up any motion. He had simply shifted in a blink, his twisted grin even wider now, and his eyes gleaming in that dark, unnatural way. I could almost feel the weight of his gaze through the screen, like he was watching me. Not just from the camera, but from the very air around me. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow, my heart racing. This isn't real. This can't be real, I told myself. It's just a glitch, just some technical problem. But when I clicked to switch to the next camera feed, there he was. Not in the lobby anymore. Now, he was in the hallway, just outside the security room. I could see his shape in the corner of the screen, barely visible in the darkness, but I could feel him there. The smile, wide and twisted, staring at me, following me with that unnatural gaze. I couldn't breathe. My fingers shook as I clicked through the other feeds, hoping, praying that I would see something, anything that made sense. But the man was everywhere. He was in the hallway, in the stairwell, in the elevator lobby. Always watching, always smiling. What the hell is going on? I thought, panic creeping into my chest. Nobody entered the building. The doors are locked. The system hasn't been triggered, so how is he here? I quickly pulled up the security logs. Maybe I could find an explanation. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Every previous guard, they had disappeared. I saw their faces on the recordings, frozen in time as they stared at the cameras, just like I was doing now. But then the screens flickered, and they were gone. No sounds, no struggle, just a void. An empty room where they had been, swallowed up by some unseen force. The last footage of them showed their eyes wide with terror, but the recordings always ended the same way, with the static. And then, nothing. I began to feel that creeping sensation of being watched, that undeniable presence pressing against me, closer than I could ever imagine. And then, something shifted in the room behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. I had no choice. I slowly swiveled in my chair, my neck stiff, my body frozen in place. There, in the reflection of the monitor just behind me, I saw him. The man, the smiling man. His grin stretched wider as his dark eyes stared at me through the reflection, only inches away. My blood ran cold, my hands shaking violently as I turned around, but the room was empty. Nothing, just the cold, empty silence. I looked back at the monitors, and there he was, closer than ever, right behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, my skin prickling with the terror that crawled up my spine. And then, everything went black. The night was always the same. The stillness, the silence, the hum of the fluorescent lights above, buzzing faintly in the background. The building felt like a ghost of itself at this hour. Nothing ever happened. And that's the way I liked it. Just me, the monitors, and the soft, endless ticking of time. 3:12 a.m. The hours dragged by. I stared at the security screens, one by one, flicking through them like I'd done 1,000 times before. The same empty hallways, the same quiet offices, the same distant shadows cast by the weak light. Nothing. Nothing at all. I wasn't expecting anything, not tonight, not any night. But then it happened. A flicker. Just a quick flash of movement so brief that I almost missed it. I stopped, my finger hovering over the mouse, unsure if I had seen something, or if it was just a glitch. But I had seen it. I leaned closer to the screen. There, in the lobby camera, a figure. Barely visible at first. Just a shadow in the corner, but then clearer, more defined. A man. I blinked, unsure of what I was seeing. The man wasn't moving. He was just standing there, perfectly still, as if frozen in time. His body was dark against the faint light spilling into the lobby. I couldn't see his face yet, but I could feel it. The unease creeping up my spine, prickling the back of my neck. Something was wrong. And then I saw it. His smile. It stretched wide across his face, too wide for it to be natural. His lips pulled back, almost painfully, and the grin, that grin, was a grotesque thing. A smile that didn't belong on a human face. The kind of smile you'd expect to see on a mask, not on a living person. I stared, frozen in place. His eyes were dark, hollow, empty. I couldn't see the whites, couldn't see any emotion behind them, just deep, bottomless voids. And he wasn't just standing there. He was looking at me, through the screen. His eyes never blinked, never moved, just fixed on me as though he could see straight through the glass, right into my soul. I don't know how long I sat there, my hand gripping the mouse, my eyes glued to the screen. Every instinct screamed for me to do something, call someone, run, anything. But I couldn't move. I couldn't look away, that smile. It was pulling me in, as if I were caught in some kind of trance, unable to escape its grasp. I clicked through the other cameras, hoping for a distraction. I clicked quickly, hoping to see some sign that maybe, just maybe, I was imagining this. Maybe it was a glitch, or a trick of the light, or some malfunction with the camera. I had to believe that, but no, there was nothing. The halls were empty. The stairwell was empty. The elevator bank was empty. Everywhere I looked, I saw nothing but dark, lifeless spaces. But not the lobby. The man was still there, still staring, still smiling. I don't know why I did it, but I zoomed in. I focused in on his face, hoping to find some sign of normalcy, something that could explain what I was seeing. But when the image sharpened, it only made it worse. His smile. It was wider now. It stretched so far, so impossibly wide, it looked like it would split his face open. It was as though it had split his face, as if his skin was simply being pulled apart by some invisible force. His eyes, they were darker than ever, black holes that threatened to swallow everything. My heart hammered in my chest. I could feel it in my throat, in my ears, a pounding that wouldn't stop. I clicked through the cameras again, my eyes darting across the screens, desperate for some answer, some explanation. But nothing made sense. How was he still here? The building was locked down. The doors hadn't opened. No one had entered. The security system hadn't triggered. But the man, he hadn't moved. He hadn't budged a single inch. He just stood there, watching, smiling. It was then I noticed something that made my blood freeze. He wasn't just standing in front of the camera. He was standing there, staring into it, waiting. The seconds seemed to stretch into minutes, every one of them dragging by slower than the last. Time felt like it was slipping away, leaving me trapped in that room with only the buzz of the lights, the hum of the monitors, and that smile. And then, just as I was about to look away, the screen flickered. The image wavered, as if the camera had lost its signal, the pixels scrambling. I leaned forward, my heart skipping a beat, my breath catching in my throat. But when the feed snapped back into focus, my eyes went wide. The man was closer. I don't know how, but the figure had moved. Without a single motion, without a single shift of his body, he was closer now, standing at the very edge of the frame. The smile, that smile, stretched even wider, and now I could see the full horror of it. It was as if the grin had been carved into his face, his lips split inhumanly wide, stretching to impossible proportions. His eyes, those deep, bottomless pits, were now staring directly into mine. I could feel it. I could feel him, closer. I could feel his presence in the room, pressing against the air around me. I wanted to scream, to move, to run, but I was paralyzed. My hand hovered over the mouse, but I couldn't click away. I couldn't tear my eyes off the screen. The man, the smiling man, was closer now, closer than he had ever been. And there was no way out. I was caught, and I knew it. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't this. The building, the silence, it had always been the same. Routine, predictable. But tonight something was different. The air felt heavier, and every tiny sound, the hum of the lights, the distant scrape of wind against the window, seemed louder than it should have been. My eyes stayed glued to the monitors, but no matter how many times I clicked through the feeds, nothing changed. The man, he was still there, standing in the lobby, staring at the camera, smiling. I couldn't tear my eyes away. I couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense. But he was real. I knew that much. His grin, the way it stretched too wide, too far, it was wrong. So wrong that it made my skin crawl. And his eyes, those hollow, empty voids, they were locked onto me. I could feel it. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to look away, but I couldn't. I tried to keep my thoughts calm, rational. It's just a glitch, right? A trick of the camera? Maybe someone's messing with the system. But as much as I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening. Something I couldn't control. I clicked through the other cameras again, but there was nothing. Just empty hallways, dark stairwells, silent elevators. No signs of anyone, no sounds. Just that man, standing there in the lobby, watching, waiting. And every time I switched back to the lobby camera, there he was, his smile impossibly wide, as though it was getting bigger with each passing second. And then it happened. The first glitch. It was subtle at first, a flicker, almost like a distortion in the screen, something I'd seen 100 times before. Static. But this was different. The screen didn't just flicker and fade, it warped. The image bent and twisted, as if the camera itself was being pulled apart. The pixels scrambled into a jagged mess, almost like something was tearing at the fabric of the image. I leaned forward, my eyes wide, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I tried to make sense of it. But the more I stared, the more wrong everything felt. I was frozen, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the mouse but not able to move. What was happening? This wasn't just a glitch, this wasn't just a bad signal or faulty equipment. No, this was something else. Something unnatural. And then, just like that, the image stopped. The static ended. But what I saw next made my stomach turn. The man, he was closer. How? He hadn't moved, at least not in the way anyone should. His position in the lobby hadn't changed physically. No footsteps, no sound. But somehow, he was now right there, just a few feet away from the camera. His face, his grin, it was impossibly wide, stretched even farther than before. His eyes, those empty voids, now seemed to burn through the screen, like they were staring directly into me, past the camera, past the glass, straight into my soul. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. My breath caught in my throat. The air around me suddenly felt heavier, thicker, colder. The walls of the security room seemed to close in around me. My heartbeat was the only sound I could hear now, pounding, deafening. The silence in the building was suffocating. But it wasn't just the proximity that unsettled me. It was the way the screen, the whole image, felt wrong. I could see it now, the way the lines of the room seemed to bend and twist, warping with every blink of my eyes. The walls stretched. The floors seemed to ripple. The whole feed was distorting. It wasn't just a camera glitch anymore. The very reality inside that screen was cracking, as though it was breaking apart, and I was witnessing it firsthand. And then, the worst part, the reflection. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in the corner of the monitor, something that didn't belong. But when I focused on it, my blood ran cold. He was there, behind me. I don't know how I knew, I don't know how I felt it, but I did. His presence, his gaze, was behind me. I didn't even have to turn around to know it. I could feel it, the weight of his stare pressing down on me, It was as if he were standing right there in the room with me. I slowly, reluctantly, turned my head, dreading what I might see. Nothing. The room was empty. I quickly turned back to the monitors. My heart was racing now, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled with the controls. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't breathe. I tried switching to another feed, hoping to break the tension. But the moment I clicked over to the lobby camera again, there he was, standing right in front of the lens. His grin was wider now, too wide, stretching far beyond human limits. His eyes, those black, empty pits, were fixed on me, waiting. The smile, it wasn't just an expression. It was a force, a presence. It was in the room with me, behind me, around me, everywhere. There was nowhere to escape it. And then the screen flickered again. It wasn't just static this time. The feed went completely black. My chest tightened. My mind raced. What was happening? I slammed my hand down on the keyboard, desperately trying to bring up the feed again, but the screen remained dark. I was alone. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was reeling. The glitch, the distorted image, the sudden disappearance of the guard, it was all too much. I needed to understand. I had to know what was going on. And that's when I made the decision. I opened up the archives, the security footage from past shifts. Maybe it was a technical error, a fluke, or maybe there was something I wasn't seeing. But I had to know. If there was any chance of figuring this out, I needed to start with the other guards. The ones who'd worked this shift before me. The ones who had come and gone, night after night. I thought back to them. Names I barely remembered. Faces I barely knew. They were just employees like me, working the overnight shifts alone in this building. But now, as I scrolled through the footage, something told me this wasn't going to be as simple as I thought. I started with the earliest recordings, the ones from weeks ago. The cameras flicked to life, showing the usual empty hallways, the dark offices, the echoing silence that filled the building when no one was around. The first guard appeared on screen. I didn't know his name, didn't even remember his face, but there he was, sitting at the security desk just like I had done hundreds of times before. At first, everything seemed normal. He was checking the monitors, clicking through the feeds. But then something happened. Something that I couldn't explain. The guard stopped. I could see his head jerk up. His eyes locked onto something. His body went rigid, stiff as a board. There was no sound, no movement, but I saw it. The way his face shifted, the way his eyes grew wide. He looked straight into the camera, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. I didn't understand. What was he looking at? I leaned in closer to the screen, but before I could make sense of it, the feed flickered. The image distorted, like static on an old TV. I blinked, watching the man's form blur and fade, his body contorting in a way that made my skin crawl. One moment he was there, frozen in terror, the next, nothing. The screen was filled with static and the camera was empty. I froze. I clicked rewind, hoping I'd missed something. I watched the same footage again, my hands trembling as I replayed it over and over. But every time, the result was the same. The guard's terrified expression, the glitch. And then, he vanished. No sign of struggle, no scream, just gone. My heart started racing. I clicked to the next shift. Maybe it was a malfunction. Maybe the guy had left, and the camera had cut out. But when I pulled up the next set of recordings, I felt my stomach drop. It was happening again. The next guard, sitting in the same seat, looking at the same monitors. But just like the first, he froze. His eyes widened in horror, and he looked directly at something, or someone. His gaze was fixed, unblinking. Then, just like the first guard, the screen flickered. The camera scrambled, and when the image returned, the room was empty. I could feel the blood draining from my face. What was happening? I clicked through more footage, faster now, guard after guard, the same pattern, the same eerie stillness before the terror set in. Each guard, eyes wide, mouth moving but silent, staring at something, and then the static. Then nothing. Every single guard who had worked the night shift before me had disappeared. What the hell was going on? I couldn't stop watching. I couldn't pull myself away, even though every instinct in me screamed to look away, to leave the building, to get out of there as fast as I could. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening to them. I clicked on the most recent footage, hoping, praying, that maybe this one would be different. Maybe this guard would be the one to survive. But as I watched, the terror took hold once again. The guard was sitting there, looking at the monitors like the others. But then, just like every other guard before him, his body froze. His face went white. His eyes shot up, wide and fearful. And for the briefest moment I saw the same thing, the same expression, the same horror. But this time I saw it clearly, the figure, the man, the one who had been standing in the lobby watching me through the cameras. His face filled the corner of the screen, his grin stretching impossibly wide, that same hollow smile that had been haunting me. The guard didn't move. He didn't get up, he didn't scream, he didn't try to run, he just stared. Stared at the camera with that same paralyzing fear, as the man's smile grew wider and wider. His eyes locked onto the guards, and in that moment, I felt like I could hear the silence screaming. Then the screen flickered, just as it had before. And when it came back, the room was empty. The guard was gone. But this time, as the static hit, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A shadow. A brief, fleeting shape, just behind the guard. I saw it. I saw the movement. The flicker of a figure, dark and distorted. A form just outside the camera's frame. The man. He was there. With him. And then, just like the others, the guard was gone. The room was empty. I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. My mind couldn't comprehend it. They had all disappeared. All of them. Gone. Just like that. And now I knew the truth. I had seen the same pattern, I had seen the smile, the man, the grin, and I knew one thing for sure. I was next. I don't know how much time had passed since I first saw him. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. The seconds dragged on, but each one felt like it was pulling me further into something I couldn't escape. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, watching that thing in the lobby. The man with the grin that never stopped stretching, never faltered. He wasn't just in the lobby anymore. No, he was in my mind, in the room with me, his eyes never leaving the camera. His hollow stare felt like it was piercing through the monitor straight into me. His smile, that grotesque, sickening grin, kept widening, impossibly wide, like it was stretching further than humanly possible, the edges of his lips curling back to reveal sharp, too white teeth. The very image was enough to make my heart pound, enough to make my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't. I was frozen. All I could do was watch. I knew I should look away, but I couldn't. The building was eerily silent. The only sound was the buzz of the fluorescent lights above me and the frantic beating of my heart in my chest. I kept telling myself it was just a glitch, just some technical error with the system. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I leaned forward, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The cameras were glitching again. The image flickered, static running through the feed like a bad connection. I reached for the mouse, but before I could click to reset the camera, the image shifted. He was closer. My pulse skipped a beat. I could feel it in my chest. He was closer. I don't know how, I don't know when, but the man had moved. He hadn't taken a single step. It wasn't like he had walked closer. No, it was as if he had shifted, moved through time itself, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. His face was now right in front of the camera, filling the screen with that terrible smile. His eyes, those dark pits, were now so close that I felt like they were staring straight through me. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. He wasn't just staring at me, he was looking into me, past the surface, past everything. The grin, the smile, it kept growing, widening. His lips stretched too far, too unnaturally, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. And those eyes, those black, empty eyes, held me in place, paralyzed. I couldn't tear my gaze away. But then, something else caught my eye. A flicker. I blinked, my vision blurry from the fear that gripped me, and when I looked again, the static had cleared, but the screen was different. The man was gone. I felt the tension in my chest ease for the briefest moment, but something wasn't right. The air in the room had changed, become heavier, colder. I looked around me, expecting the walls to close in, expecting to see him standing right behind me, grinning in my ear. But there was nothing. The room was empty. I turned back to the monitors, trying to steady my breath. The building felt too quiet. The silence was oppressive, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now. He was here. Somewhere. I glanced at the lobby camera again, feeling my chest tighten as I clicked through the feeds, desperately trying to distract myself, trying to find something, anything that made sense. The camera flickered again. The screen distorted for a moment, but I quickly glanced away. The static on the feed made the air crackle like it was alive, like the camera itself was pulling in something that didn't belong. And then it happened. The distortion cleared, and there he was, right in front of the camera. The man. The man was inside. He was so close now that his face took up the entire screen. His grin, still stretching, impossibly wide, filled the lens. The smile was so large, so unnatural, that it seemed to be consuming his entire face. His teeth gleamed too white in the dim light, too sharp, as if they were designed to tear through skin, to devour everything. His eyes, those black void-like eyes, burned into me. I felt like they were staring not just at me, but through me, reaching into my very soul. I tried to pull away, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away. I was trapped, caught in his gaze. I could feel the air growing colder, heavier. He was in the building. The realization hit me like a cold slap across the face. He wasn't just on the screens. He was here, somewhere, in the building, right now. And he was getting closer. With every passing second, I could feel him, that presence growing stronger, filling the room, filling the entire building with the weight of his stare. I couldn't escape it. He was there, watching me. Always. I slowly turned around, my eyes scanning the room. Every part of me screamed to look behind me, but my feet were frozen to the floor, my body shaking with a terror I had never known. I couldn't breathe. I had to look. I turned. The room was empty. The cold, oppressive silence was the only thing that answered me. But when I turned back to the screen, he was still there. Not on the camera feed anymore. No. He was right in front of me. His grin was wider now, impossibly so, stretching beyond what any human mouth should be capable of. His eyes burned into mine, pulling me closer. I could hear his presence, feel it, like a pressure building in the room, closing in on me. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, to get out of there, to escape. But it was too late. The air was suffocating. I could feel it pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe, making my skin crawl. The hum of the lights overhead had become deafening, like an electric buzz that filled the room with a tension I couldn't shake. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the controls, but my body was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the monitors. What's happening? My thoughts were jumbled, racing, each one louder than the last. It's just a glitch, it's just a glitch. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had seen him, the man. I had seen that twisted smile. I had felt the weight of his eyes burning through the screen, felt them on me, behind me, like he was here in the room with me, not just on the feed. I looked at the clock, 3:45 a.m., and realized with a sudden jolt that time had slipped away. The hours had stretched on, but the moment felt like it was frozen. I leaned forward, my breath shallow. The static on the screens flickered, and I saw his face again. There, on the monitor. The man's face was right there, in front of the camera, the grin impossibly wide, stretching so far it looked like it was about to tear his face apart. His eyes, those empty dark pits, were locked on me, and the longer I stared, the more I felt like I was suffocating. He wasn't just in the camera. No, he was in my head. Move! Move! I screamed silently in my mind, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't move, I couldn't look away. And then, the lights flickered again, that crackling buzz, before plunging the room into total darkness. The building seemed to hold its breath, and I felt my own breath catch in my throat, a sharp panic rising in my chest. I reached for the switch, desperate to get the lights back on, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the desk. And then I heard it. A breath. Software ragged. Almost like a whisper, but it wasn't just in my head. No, it was real. Right behind me. I jerked around, my heart hammering in my chest, every muscle screaming at me to run, to get up, but I couldn't. I couldn't. He was here. He was behind me. I spun back to the monitors. The static was gone, the lights were still off. But when the feed flickered back into focus, I saw it. The man. The smiling man. His face was inches from the camera, so close I could almost feel the heat of his breath on the other side of the screen. That smile. It stretched impossibly wide. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth too sharp, too white, too many. And his eyes, those deep, hollow voids, burned into mine. It wasn't just a look, it was hunting. A dark, predatory gaze that seemed to cut through the very air between us. And then, something inside me snapped. The terror, the coldness, the weight of his gaze. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs shaky, and I swung my head around to look. I had to see him. I had to know where he was. Nothing. I turned back to the screen. He was still there. His grin stretched wider. His eyes, those endless black pits, didn't blink once. He didn't move. But I could feel it. He was getting closer. And then, I saw it. My reflection in the monitor distorted by the flickering light. He was there, right behind me. I could see his form in the reflection just over my shoulder, standing so close that his smile filled the screen. I could feel him there, his presence overwhelming, a dark shadow pressing in around me. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't look away. His eyes, those terrible black eyes, seemed to draw me in, pull me deeper into the abyss. I tried to move, but I was frozen, trapped. I couldn't escape. And that's when the screen went black. I don't remember what happened next. All I know is that I was sitting there, in the dark, with the weight of his presence pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only feel it. His grin, wide, stretching further than I thought possible. His eyes, his gaze, had never left me. And I knew in that final moment that I was no longer alone. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was suffocating me, the air too thick, too heavy. Every single breath I tried to take felt like it was getting harder, like the building itself was closing in on me. The silence around me had become deafening, each second stretching longer than the last, each one carrying the weight of something that didn't belong. I looked at the clock, 3:50 a.m. The time felt irrelevant now. It felt like it had stopped altogether, or maybe it was just me. I couldn't tell. My body was stiff, my mind racing, but I couldn't make sense of anything. The hum of the lights above had become almost unbearable, its quiet buzz now a constant presence in the back of my skull, as though it was trying to reach inside of me, burrowing into my mind. The last image I saw on the monitor was the man's face, the smile stretching wider, wider than anything that could belong to a human, his hollow eyes staring into me, through me. I hadn't moved. I couldn't. It was like he was a part of the building itself now, no way out. I glanced at the monitors again, half expecting them to be black, to be static once more. But there was nothing. The feed was gone. Just a blank screen staring back at me like a void. For a moment I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just losing my mind. But as I sat there trying to steady my breathing, trying to clear my head, I felt it. He was still here. The thought hit me so suddenly that it felt like a cold fist in my chest. I didn't have to see him to know. I could feel it, the weight of his presence in the room pressing down on me. It was like something had shifted in the air. Something had changed. The building, once so lifeless, now felt alive. Alive with something terrible. I turned to the door, the lock, the windows, all secure, all shut tight just as they'd been when I first sat down. But it didn't matter. I could feel it. He was inside now. A sound, a whisper, floated to me from the corner of the room. A soft, distant creak. It was almost imperceptible. But my body reacted before my mind could even process it. My heart skipped a beat, my body tensed. I whipped my head around, eyes darting to the corners of the room. Nothing. But the air, it felt different. Heavy. I turned back to the monitors, still black, still empty. But I couldn't just sit here, I needed to do something. I grabbed the mouse with shaky fingers and clicked through the feeds, praying for anything. Any sign. But every camera was static, every hallway empty. The building was dead. And yet, the presence. It was so close now. I could feel it in my bones, in the pit of my stomach. The shadows in the room were shifting, pulling, stretching in ways that weren't natural. The walls seemed to close in around me, the light flickering in and out like a broken pulse. Each time the lights flickered, I could feel a little piece of my sanity slipping away. And then, as if the building itself were gasping for air, the power cut out entirely. Complete darkness. My hands flew to the desk, trying to reset the system, but it was useless. Nothing happened. The building was silent now, eerily silent. The stillness pressed in like a living thing, suffocating everything. I reached for the flashlight under the desk, hands trembling. I flicked it on, the beam slicing through the blackness, but the shadows seemed to grow with every passing second, eating up the light like it wasn't even there. And then it hit me. I wasn't alone anymore. I felt him. I felt him. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I spun around, heart pounding, eyes wide, the beam of the flashlight shaking in my hands. The light danced wildly across the room, but there was nothing. Nothing but the stillness. Still, I could feel it. He was here. Somewhere. I slowly turned back to the monitors, dreading what I might see, but something caught my eye, the slightest movement. A flicker on the feed. For a brief moment, the screen was filled with static. Just a few seconds of white noise. But when it cleared, my stomach lurched. The man, his face, not on the screen, not in the hallway, but right there, right in front of me. His grin stretched wide, wider than it ever should have been, his hollow eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as if he'd always been there, waiting. The image filled the screen, filling the room with that smile, that terrible, endless smile. His breath fogged up the camera lens, but it wasn't just the camera. I could feel him, behind me. I slowly, carefully turned my head. Nothing. The room was empty, but the darkness was thicker now, pressing in. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, pounding in my ears. The light flickered once more, dimming to near nothingness. The screens went black again. I froze. My blood ran cold. The silence in the room deepened. It swallowed everything. The door was still locked, the window still sealed. And then I saw it. A shadow. Right behind me, reflected in the monitors. And I knew in that final moment that I was no longer just watching him. He was watching me. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.